The thermometer on the fence post read -41 the morning they finally stopped laughing. 51 nights before that, the same neighbors had been leaning over the same fence and calling it the dump, the junkyard, the tire pile with a door in it. One man, a retired trucker named Boyd, took a photo on his flip phone and mailed it to the county, printed on regular paper, with an arrow drawn in blue ballpoint and the word eyesore written underneath. Then February came. Then the February nobody in Albany County had ever seen, the one the National Weather Service would eventually call the deepest continuous freeze on the eastern Wyoming plains since instruments began keeping track. And inside the tire pile with the door in it, a woman named Delphine Moreau Bracken sat at a small wooden table in her stocking feet, drinking chicory coffee, and noted in pencil at the top of a grocery receipt that the inside wall by her bed was 63 degrees. 63. That receipt is the whole story. The rest is just how she got there, and why the thing the neighbors were laughing at was, in fact, one of the oldest ideas humans ever had about how to stay alive in the cold. She had not planned to become a woman who lived inside a wall of tires. 31 years of marriage and a small bookkeeping practice in a strip mall outside Cheyenne had not pointed toward this. Her husband had been a soil conservation agent for the state, a quiet man with a habit of pressing wildflowers into the county plat books at his office. And when he died of a heart attack in the checkout line at a hardware store in the summer of 2019, the arithmetic of her life came apart in a way that surprised her. The mortgage had been in his name. So had the truck, the health plan, the life insurance that turned out to have lapsed. The house went first, then the practice when she couldn't concentrate enough to reconcile a ledger, then the rented efficiency above the laundromat when her savings ran out on a Tuesday in October. She was 57 when she started sleeping in the Subaru. By the time she was 58, she had a patch of land, 5 acres of scrub and sage that her late brother had bought in the 90s, thinking he'd retire on it, left to her in a will nobody had bothered to contest, because the land was considered essentially worthless. It sat 10 miles outside Laramie on a dirt road the county plowed twice a year if it felt like it. No well, no power lines. A single leaning cottonwood with a magpie's nest in it, and wind, constant, considered, opinionated wind. She moved the Subaru onto the land in March 2020. The wind rocked it like a cradle the whole first night. In the morning, she sat on the hood with a cup of instant coffee, looked at the cottonwood and the magpie and the 5 acres of nothing, and understood that she was going to have to build something or die. She did not know how. She had been a bookkeeper. The tires were an accident. A man named Alvaro, who ran the only tire shop in town that would service semi-trailers, had a fenced lot behind his garage where waste casings piled up in a black hill taller than his building. He paid $2 per tire to have them hauled to a recycling plant in Denver, and the hauling company had just raised its rates for the 3rd time. When Delphine walked in one April afternoon in her work jeans and her silver braid, a woman of no particular fame in a town full of them, and asked if she could take some off his hands, he laughed out loud. Not at her, at the arithmetic. "Take them all," he said. "Please. I will pay you." He did not pay her. She refused. But he did loan her a flatbed trailer every Saturday for a month. And by the end of April, she had 260 tires lined up along the southern edge of her 5 acres, stacked like a pile of enormous black donuts, waiting for her to understand what she was going to do with them. She did not understand yet. She had only read, in a library book she'd checked out because the cover showed a house built into a hillside in New Mexico, that there was a thing called an earthship and that its walls were made of tires packed with dirt. The book said the tires acted as thermal mass. She did not at that point know what thermal mass was. Here is the thing about a tire. A car tire, the kind that comes off a Ford or a Toyota at the end of its life, weighs about 22 pounds empty. When you take that tire and pack it, slowly and carefully and with a small sledgehammer, full of the dirt and clay and gravel you have dug out of the ground 5 feet away, that tire now weighs about 320 pounds. It is no longer round and springy. It is a dense, drum-tight, shockingly heavy object. If you set it on the ground and try to push it, it will not move. If you stack another one on top and pack that one, and another, you are no longer stacking tires. You are stacking small rubber-sheathed boulders, 260 of them, arranged in a curve like a bent elbow against the west wind, make a wall. But the wall is only the first thing the tires are doing. The second thing, the thing that turns the pile of rubber and dirt into a sleeping body that breathes heat back at you in the middle of February, is the thing she did not understand in April, and was beginning to understand by July, and understood completely by the time the cold came. The tires are a battery. Not a battery the way a phone has a battery for warmth. Delphine spent the summer of 2020 teaching herself the strangest kind of masonry anyone in Albany County had ever seen. She would walk out at 6 in the morning in the slanting light, carrying a shovel and a short-handled sledge and a 5-gallon bucket. She would set a tire on the curve of its future wall. She would shovel dirt from the pit she was digging, and the pit, too, had a purpose, because the house was going to be half buried into the south-facing slope of the rise behind the cottonwood. And she would begin to pound. The sledge only came down once every second or so. It was not about force. It was about rhythm, about finding the places in the tire's sidewall that would take another cupful, about the small silver ringing sound the packed dirt made when you hit it and it had nothing left to give. The tire went from floppy to firm, from firm to stone. A tire, fully packed, rang almost like a bell when you struck it with the back of the sledge. She could pack 4 tires a day at first. By August, 7. By September, 9. And her shoulders looked like a welder's shoulders, and her palms had hardened into something that did not blister anymore, and the burn scar on the back of her left hand, the one she'd gotten at 16 from a stove her grandmother told her not to touch, had faded almost back to skin color from being in the sun so much. The wall rose 6 inches a week. 6 inches. If you do the arithmetic on 6 inches a week, you understand why the neighbors, the distant ones on the only other 2 inhabited parcels within eyeshot, thought she was losing her mind. A wall rising at the speed of a potted plant. A woman in her late 50s, alone, building what looked from a half-mile off like a garbage dump with ambitions. Boyd, the retired trucker on the parcel to the east, was the first to drive over in his pickup. He did not get out. He rolled the window down. He looked at the curve of packed tires in the pit and the plastic tarp she had rigged over her sleeping corner, and he said, with the practiced patience of a man who has watched a lot of people make terrible decisions, "Ma'am, the county will condemn that before you finish it." She said, "I know what I'm doing." She did not know what she was doing, but she had started to. Here is what she had started to understand. The cold, the serious cold, the kind of cold that kills people in cars and in tents and in thin-walled houses built on slabs in places they were never meant to be built, is not actually an active thing. It is an absence. Heat moves. Cold is what's left when the heat has gone somewhere else. Every warm thing in a cold world is leaking, through glass, through thin siding, through uninsulated roofs, through the ground itself. And the job of a shelter, if you really think about it, is not to make heat. It is to slow the leak. There are 2 ways to slow the leak. One is insulation, material full of trapped air which heat cannot easily cross, because heat cannot easily cross air. A down jacket, a wool blanket, the pink fiberglass on the walls of a suburban house. The other is mass. Mass does not stop heat. Mass absorbs heat and then releases it slowly, over hours, over days. A cast iron pan you put in the oven at 5 o'clock will still be warm at 10. A stone that has sat in the sun all afternoon will still be warm at midnight. A brick wall that has been heated by a fireplace for 3 days will still be radiating warmth a week later, even if the fire has gone out. A tire, packed with 300 pounds of earth and clay, is mass. A wall made of 260 such tires is almost 40 tons of mass. It is, for thermal purposes, indistinguishable from a wall made of stone. And stone, properly placed, has been keeping humans alive in terrible cold for about as long as there have been humans. Delphine did not know any of this in April. By November, when she moved into the half-buried curve of tires and dirt and reclaimed windows and the one small cast-iron stove she had bought used in an auction for $94, she knew it the way a person knows the weight of their own body. The first winter was a practice winter. It was mild, as the Laramie foothills go. The coldest night was only -12, and she spent most of it sealing and learning. She learned that the gap at the top of the south-facing glass, where she had not yet gotten the seal right, leaked warmth like an open wound. She learned that the dirt floor, once she had tamped it and sealed it with a mixture of clay and linseed oil the old adobe builders used, held temperature better than any floor she had ever walked on. She learned that her little cast-iron stove, burning 12 inches of split juniper, could warm the whole space in 40 minutes in the evening, and that the thick tire wall behind her bed, once it had taken the heat in, would keep giving it back to her at 2 in the morning, at 4, at dawn, a slow, radiant warmth that did not fluctuate the way the air did. She learned, most importantly, that the wall was not a wall the way a stick-built wall is a wall. A stick-built wall is a barrier. It holds heat on one side and cold on the other, and it does this mostly by being thin and full of insulation and hoping the temperature differential isn't too brutal. A tire and earth wall, 3 feet thick at the base, does something different. It buffers. The outside face of the wall, in January, might be 10 degrees. The inside face of the same wall, at the same moment, might be 62. Between those two faces, inside the packed earth, the temperature gradient is a slow slope, warmer on the inside, cooler on the outside, with the heat migrating so slowly through the mass that by the time the coldest part of any given cold snap has reached the inside face, the snap is over, and the outside face is warming up again. The wall, in other words, does not fight the cold. The wall waits it out. She wrote this in pencil on a piece of paper tacked to the back of the cottonwood. The wall waits it out. She did not know she was about to need that sentence. The second summer, she finished the roof. The roof had been the hardest part. A tire wall is strong against almost anything except a bad roof, because a bad roof lets water in, and water in a packed earth wall is a wall eating itself. She had scavenged corrugated steel from a collapsed hay barn the rancher on the west parcel had offered her for free, because hauling it was more expensive than the scrap value, and she had built a low-shed roof with a 6-inch slope, and she had insulated the underside of the steel with bales of straw pinned between the rafters. On top of the straw, a layer of earth. On top of the earth, grass seed, which took in the second year and made the roof from a distance look like part of the hillside. From the road, at certain angles and certain light, you could no longer see that there was a house there at all. This was the moment Boyd told his wife, over dinner, that the old woman had gone full hobbit. His wife, a retired schoolteacher named Enid, looked out the kitchen window at the low green mound with its single stovepipe and its one south-facing window, catching the afternoon sun, and said, "Boyd, honey, that is the least stupid thing on this entire road." Boyd did not speak to Enid for a day and a half. The laughing, the real laughing, happened in the third autumn. By then, word had gotten around. The waitress at the diner on 3rd Street, a young woman with a nose ring and a complicated relationship with her own mother, had started calling Delphine the tire lady the way you might say the mayor, with a kind of fond, small-town specificity. A county building inspector had driven out once, looked at the wall, looked at the roof, looked at the small solar panel Delphine had rigged to a truck battery for her single light bulb, and driven away without writing anything down, because technically nothing she had built required a permit on an unincorporated parcel of that size, and technically the earth and tire structure did not meet any code he was qualified to evaluate. And technically he had decided on the drive and that he was not going to be the man who told a widow in her 60s that her home was illegal. But the neighbors laughed, the newer ones especially. A young couple had bought the parcel directly north of hers in July of the 3rd year, a man who did something in commercial real estate in Denver, and commuted to Laramie on weekends, and a woman who ran a wellness account on a photo-sharing app, and they had built in 4 months a modular prefab on a concrete slab with a propane furnace and cathedral ceilings and enormous windows that faced every direction at once. The house looked, from Delphine's small grassy mound, like an aquarium on the prairie. The man, whose name was Tyler, took to driving his side-by-side along the boundary fence and pointing at the tire wall for his weekend guests. That, he would say, is what you don't want happening to property values. His wife would post videos sometimes. The videos did not go viral. They got enough views for her to feel she was making a statement. Delphine, when she noticed the videos, a friend from church had shown her, concerned, looked at her phone for a long moment, and then handed it back and said, The tires don't mind. She went back to canning the last of the tomatoes. The winter of the 5th year started with a warning. The long-range forecasts, the ones farmers and ranchers read with the same attention other people give to the sports pages, had been saying since October that something unusual was building over the Arctic. A vortex, a weakness in the jet stream, a setup that the Climate Prediction Center was calling high-impact potential for the central and northern plains. Most people ignored it. Most winters start with warnings. Most warnings come to nothing. This one did not come to nothing. The first cold front dropped in on the evening of January 29th and did not leave for 43 days. 43 days is not an exaggeration. 43 is the number the National Weather Service Cheyenne office would eventually attach to the event in its post-season summary. 43 consecutive days in which the temperature in Albany County did not rise above freezing at any hour. Of those 43, 19 saw overnight lows colder than -20. Of those 19, 4 broke -40. The wind, the whole time, averaged 17 miles an hour from the west-northwest, with gusts to 63. This is the kind of cold that breaks things. Pipes, engines, people. The propane truck could not reach the aquarium on the prairie for 7 days during the worst of it, because the county road graders could not keep up with the drifts, and a propane furnace without propane is a very expensive box of cold air. Tyler and his wife went to a hotel in Denver on the 9th day and did not return until April. Boyd's pickup would not start on 3 separate mornings. His well line froze on the 12th day. He and Enid kept their kitchen at 52 degrees with a wood stove and slept in every piece of clothing they owned. The woman at the diner on 3rd Street, the one with the nose ring, lost power for 111 hours. And Delphine Moreau Bracken, 5 miles out on the dirt road the county had stopped trying to plow after the 2nd week, sat at her small wooden table, drinking chicory coffee in her stocking feet, and wrote a number in pencil at the top of a grocery receipt. 63. Let me explain what 63 meant, because if you have not lived in real cold, you might think 63 is nothing special. You might think, well, most people keep their thermostats around 68, so 63 is a little chilly, but basically fine. 63 on a night when it is -41 outside is 104 degrees of difference. 104 degrees. The nearest house on the road, Boyd's, which had a full propane furnace and a wood stove running at capacity, and a man who had been driving diesel trucks in winter for 50 years and knew what he was doing, was holding 49 degrees at its warmest point, the kitchen, at the same hour. Delphine was holding 63 in her bedroom with a single stove fed a log every 4 hours. She was using, by her own rough calculation, and bookkeepers' calculations are not generally rough, about 1/8 the fuel Boyd was using, to stay 14 degrees warmer. She was not a witch. She was not lucky. She was not warmer because of some trick involving insulation or clever sealing or space-age materials. She was warmer because of the weight. The weight was the whole thing. The weight is what the mockery had been aimed at all along, without anyone knowing it. Ma'am, that wall must weigh a ton. Well, yes. It weighed almost 40. Here is what 40 tons of packed earth, arranged in a 3-foot thick curve against the west and north winds, did during the 43 days. On the first night of the cold front, when the outside temperature fell from 22 to -6 in about 6 hours, the inside face of her wall dropped from 68 to 67. On the second night, when the low hit -15, the inside face of her wall was 66. On the 5th night, -28 outside, the inside face of her wall was 64. On the 11th night, the first -40 night of the storm, the inside face of her wall was 62. 62. The wall was not fighting the cold. It was, exactly as she had written on the paper tacked to the cottonwood 2 years before, waiting it out. The cold was taking days, 5, 6, 7 days, to work its way through the packed earth, and by the time any given wave of it reached the inside face, the next wave was just starting on the outside face, and the waves were averaging out across the thickness of the wall, and the inside face of the wall was holding, stubborn as an old horse, in the low 60s. At night, she would bank the stove at 10. By 2 in the morning, the air temperature in the room would have drifted down to 58, because air has no mass to speak of, and air cools fast. But she did not sleep in the air. She slept against the wall. Her back, all night, was against 62-degree packed earth, and packed earth, once it is 62 degrees, does not become 58 degrees quickly. The wall radiated warmth into her back. The wall radiated warmth into the air around her bed. At 5 in the morning, when the outside temperature was -41 and the wind was stripping the snow off the drifts and throwing it at the horizon, Delphine's wall was 61. Her air was 56. Her down comforter was holding her at roughly 92, and she was, by any medical definition, comfortable. In the morning she would wake, put on her wool socks, cross to the stove, feed it 4 splits of juniper, watch the flame catch, and by the time her kettle whistled, the room was back to 68, and the wall that had been 61 at dawn, was already beginning to drink the new heat back in. Because the wall, when it's 61 and the room is 68, is suddenly the cooler thing in the room, and heat moves toward cold the way water moves downhill. The wall took the stove's warmth into itself all day. At night, she let the stove die down. The wall gave it back. This is the mechanism. This is what a thermal battery is. It charges in the day. It discharges at night. A house with no mass, the aquarium on the prairie, has no battery. Every degree the furnace makes is lost the moment the furnace stops making it. A house with mass has a battery the size of a small mountain, and the mountain, once it's warm, stays warm the way a mountain stays warm. Slowly, patiently, on its own timeline. On day 22 of the freeze, when -33 had been the high for 6 days running, Boyd drove his pickup to Delphine's gate because his water had been out for 3 days, and he had heard, through the churchwoman, that Delphine had a cistern buried below the frost line and was pulling from it without incident. He did not ring the bell. There was no bell. He stood at her door in 3 coats and a balaclava and knocked. When she opened the door, warm air came out of the house and hit him in the face. He told Enid afterwards that it was like opening an oven. He said, "Afternoon, ma'am," and she said, "Come in, Boyd." And he came in, and he stood on her packed earth floor in his enormous boots, and he looked at the curve of the tire wall, where the plaster had been troweled over the last 3 tires, so smoothly that you could only tell what was underneath if you ran your hand along it. And he looked at the small stove, and he looked at the thermometer on the wall, which read 67, and he did a thing he had not done since his daughter's wedding. He took off his hat. He said, "Ma'am, could you teach me how you did this?" She put on water for tea. The laughing stopped that week, not because of Boyd exactly, but because Boyd was the kind of man whose opinion in a place like the foothills above Laramie was a weather system in itself. If Boyd took off his hat to the tire lady was no longer a tire lady. She was a neighbor. She was, as he would put it to his brother on the phone that evening, the only one on the whole damn road who knew what she was doing when the real cold came. Tyler never came back. The aquarium on the prairie was listed in May. It sold in September, at a loss, to a couple from Cheyenne who immediately rented it out. The county building inspector, the same one who had driven away 4 years before, drove back out in April with an assistant and spent 2 hours on Delphine's property with a clipboard and did not write a citation. He wrote, instead, a short, informal report for the department's records titled Unpermitted Earth-Bermed Residence, Section 14, Potential Reference Case. He gave a copy to Delphine. He told her that if the state ever updated its rural building codes, her house would probably be what the code was updated around. She filed the report in a cardboard box with her grocery receipts. The receipt that said 63 was still on top. Here is what's worth understanding about all of this. Because the whole thing, the whole 5-year arc from Subaru to Cottonwood to Tire Pile to the morning Boyd took off his hat, is not really a story about a remarkable woman, although Delphine was remarkable. It's not really a story about a remarkable winter, although the winter of the 5th year broke a 12-decade record and will be studied by climatologists for a long time. It's a story about a mechanism, and the mechanism is not new. It is, in fact, one of the oldest mechanisms humans have. The Pueblo peoples of the Southwest built adobe walls 3 feet thick for exactly this reason, 800 years before any European wrote a book about thermodynamics. The Scots built stone broche towers with walls that stored the warmth of summer into October. The peasants of the Aegean built their whitewashed houses with walls of rubble and mud, because rubble and mud have mass, and mass is a battery, and a battery evens out the day. The yurt of the Mongolian steppe uses felt instead of mass. Different mechanism, same problem. Every cold climate human culture that lasted more than a couple of generations figured out that the thin-walled, low-mass house is a house for places where the weather is always kind. Where the weather isn't always kind, the walls get thick because the cold isn't something you fight. The cold is something you wait out, and to wait out a week of -40, you need something that can hold a week's worth of heat inside itself. A stick-built house cannot do this. A modular prefab on a slab cannot do this. A propane furnace in a glass box is not a way of keeping warm. It is a bet that the propane will keep coming. When the propane stops, and in a real cold snap, in a place far enough out, the propane always eventually stops. The glass box is simply a very expensive way of being outside. Delphine, without meaning to, and without knowing at first what she was doing, had built a shelter in the ancient way. She had done it with used car tires because car tires were what she had, but the tires were only the container. The actual shelter was the 40 tons of earth inside them. The actual shelter was mass, and mass, once it understands what it's been asked to do, is patient. She still lives there. She is 64 now. The cottonwood is still leaning in the same direction. The magpie's nest has been rebuilt 3 times by at least 2 generations of birds. The wall has settled about 1.25 inches in the 9 years since she finished it, which is well within the tolerances the Earthship books had told her to expect. The roof grass comes back every May. The solar array has grown to 3 panels. There is a small greenhouse on the south side now, built of salvaged windows and more tires, where she grows tomatoes and greens into December. Boyd died in 2023 of a stroke. At 79, in his own kitchen, Enid still brings her a loaf of sourdough every other Friday. The 2 women sit at the small wooden table and drink chicory coffee and talk about everything except the winter, which neither of them likes to talk about directly, because it was the winter that changed what the word neighbor meant to both of them. The grocery receipt that said 63 is in a wooden frame on the wall above the stove. You can't read the penciled number from more than about 6 feet away. You'd think it was a random piece of paper, yellowed and curled, pinned there by a woman with sentimental taste. But if you stand close and you let your eyes adjust to the light coming in the south window, you can see the 63 at the top and the date underneath it, and if you ask her what it means, she will tell you in the slow way she has of telling anything that it is the number of the day she understood, finally and completely, what her wall was for. The wall is for waiting. The cold will pass, and what is warm will remain warm, if it has been built with weight enough to remember.